poem, prayer demand, really, that Atmajoti just read was so beautiful. I almost want you to come back up and read it again. Because I was listening to it, the way Yogananda speaks to God is often in such a different language than what we would use. We probably, most of us probably don't wake up and pray that way every day. But that was so exquisite. Let me feel that thou and I are one. Take me in all of these ways, through sounds, through seeing you're manifested everywhere. It goes on, I don't remember it, of course, but till I know, till I remember, till I realize the truth that we are already one. And I just thought that is the prayer that we should all be praying. That prayer was so perfect for today. Thank you so much for that, for all of us. Yesterday we had a family service. They're always delightful. And as many of you must know, you never know what's going to come out of the mouths of these children. But at the very end of the service, it was all over. One of the little girls came up to me. The end of our service, the last parts, are that we do a fire ceremony, just like we do here. We have, all of us, we put ghee into the fire and then rice into the fire. You can imagine how much the kids love that. There is rice everywhere. No matter how much I try and convince them that even one little kernel of rice will speak to God, they make sure every bit of rice that they've been given goes into the fire. I think we should live with their enthusiasm. And then we do an arati. So all of these children and their parents, everybody, are handed a candle. And they're up here, as we do at the end of service, waving this light. And we've talked about it. And they understand that they are giving this rice and ghee and then the light to God himself. And they take it very seriously. One of the little girls came up. Everybody else was cleaning up. And she takes my hand and she takes me to the altar. And she said, Shanti, is God really in those pictures? And so I said to her, do you think he is? And she said, oh yeah, I talked to him. I said, well, there's your answer. Of course he's in the pictures. And I thought it was so precious. We are working so hard, most of us, to try and remember and remind ourselves that God is alive in everything, that these aren't stagnant pictures up here, that their energy, their vibration, everything about them will come to us through these pictures if we could see with those eyes of children, then we would be much more likely to be able to do what Jesus and Krishna and Swamiji are inviting us to do in these readings, which is to see God everywhere such that we can begin to move to that place of remembering that everything in this universe is a manifestation of that divine energy, and that we are, in fact, already one with God. This reading is so wonderful. It's just such a deep and beautiful reading because what it's asking of us, what Jesus is saying, and what Krishna says so beautifully, Krishna promises us if we can achieve this goal that Christ is inviting us to try and attain, of seeing God everywhere, that we would never lose sight of him, it says, nor he of us. And I keep stopping every time I read that, the Gita, And I just remind myself, do this, because God never really loses sight of us. It's not that he's gone anywhere. It's just that we forget. So all we need to do is remind ourselves. But for us, that will take a real shift in consciousness. And that's what we're being invited to do in this reading. It's not to try and change our thoughts one by one, because of course that would be impossible. But if we change our consciousness, if we change the very way that we hold everything we see and feel and hear and do in the universe, then we would be living in truth, which already exists. That truth is. God is truth, and that's the given. But we, because Maya is just constructed such to keep taking us out into the world, to keep believing that we are separate from everything. And this reading, in such a beautiful way, says to us, no, everything is unitive. Everything is one. It's you that's living in duality. So if you can bring your consciousness back in line with Christ consciousness, then you will always be living from that place of truth. In this reading, it's so beautiful, the way, this is a reading, of course, from Autobiography of a Yogi, and Master's showing us, of course, Master was born a master, so we assume that he's telling us this story not simply to relate something that happened to him, but he's telling us this story to say, every time you slip, every time you think that you're separate from anybody or anything, every time you forget to see the divine looking back at you in every experience of life, remember this simple story where absolutely out of the blue, after Yogananda had this critical thought, Master Mahashaya, who, I don't have the words in front of me, but we know that Yogananda said, I forget the adjective he used, but he held him in extremely high regard. And he appears to him, and he answers his thought. Isn't it true, little sir, he says, how sweet that is, that the name of God is sweet on all lips? Doesn't matter how people are calling to God, because remember, Yogananda was criticizing that it was so loud, that it was so noisy, that their singing to God was so outward. And Master Mahashaya just corrects him. And then that beautiful line, after he corrected him, Yogananda says this, then I went on a magic carpet ride with him. When truth prevailed, Yogananda was able to be in that space of Christ consciousness, of cosmic consciousness. That's what that magic carpet ride really meant, is that it transported me just from knowing truth, just from being able to come back to truth. It's so clear, and it's made clear in all of these teachings, that what is real, we can't really ever learn or perceive with our minds. That what is real, we feel and we know with our heart. Swami Kriyananda, in a talk that I just listened to yesterday, it was one of those Ask Me About Truth, these very short little talks. And I stopped at it because the title of the whole Ask Me About Truth was called Living in the Presence of God. And so I was listening to these questions that Dharmadas and Nirmala present to Swamiji. They're actually very, very well done. But at one point, Swamiji said they were asking him about his path to God, how he got to living in the presence of God at all times. And he said, I had the disadvantage of going through reason. This is what Swamiji said. He said, had I loved God with all my heart right from the beginning, I would have gone straight to him. Then he goes on to talk about how hard it was, how hard it was for him because of the teaching in the Anglican church that he was sort of raised in. But he presents right away this knowing that it's through the heart, it's through loving God, it's not through thoughts that can take us to this is good, that's bad, this feels good, that doesn't. The other night I was involved in a question and answer session that we were doing, and somebody asked me, as people always do, every question that came was so beautiful, let me say that, because I'll probably refer to a few of them, not with any judgment. They were sincere and wonderful questions that were asked, but this question that was asked, which often is can you show me how to develop this devotion? Can you show me how to get to that place of loving God this way with all one's heart, mind, soul, and strength, really? And as always, the answer had to be, you can't learn that. You can't think about it. Doesn't matter how smart you are. In fact, the smarter you are, maybe the more difficult it gets. That you have to leave your mind and what we think we know. Again, just referring back to this judgment that we come in with, this duality of knowing. We think we know what's right and what's wrong. We think that we will think our way to loving God, but in fact, almost all of that thinking gets in our way. And very much like what Swamiji was alluding to here, saying I had the disadvantage of first coming in and trying to use reason to find God. I try to convey that this love of God, this is a practice, really, of seeing God everywhere, of beginning to see God in everyone all the time, and to open your heart and love each person. Open your heart and love every situation that comes to you, because as you practice that, you actually fall into that love of God. You will not be able to figure it out. You have to make it into a practice and just keep loving. You don't have to understand why. You just have to be accepting and loving. And soon, that very energy, the strength of that energy, will open your heart. And soon, you'll be living from there. And you will not be able to see anything but God everywhere, all the time. It's not rational. It won't make sense. But your heart will begin to fill, and it will burst with that love, which is really what living in the presence of God is. It's an experience of the heart. It's not an experience of the mind. It has to be from the heart. Swamiji says, I don't know where I read this. I was trying to remember, but it might be in his book, The New Path. But he says, if you walk into a room that's filled with light, but you close your eyes, you're going to bump into things. If you walk into a room that's filled with light, but you close your eyes, you're going to see darkness. If you preferred to, I'm sorry, let me just find it here because I want to quote him. If you refuse to see the light, this is what he says. Of course, he said it so much better than I just did. If you refuse to see the light, you create darkness in your world. If you refuse to open your heart, you create anger, greed, jealousy. He says even worse, apathy. And if you refuse to feel joy, you create misery. Now, what really grabbed me about those words was the word create over and over and over. Remember, we're talking about our path towards living in the presence of God. If we're not willing to open our eyes and see the light, which is God, we cannot live in his presence. If we're not willing to open our heart and feel and experience the love everywhere that is God, we cannot be living in his presence. And the way Swamiji says it is so powerful because he shows us how we always have the opportunity to create what we want, because that's the word he uses over and over. So what we're being invited to do is keep our eyes open, looking for light everywhere. It's an effort. It's a conscious effort. Otherwise, we do walk around in the dark, most of us. We do walk around closing our hearts at times. We don't always see things that come to us as being joyful, but we have the power to do it. And this is what Swamiji is saying here. He says in a more expanded commentary on this reading, he talks about our redemption. Redemption means living in the presence of God. Redemption means living in the light that dispels darkness, that dispels ignorance. Ignorance meaning that which takes us away. He talks again and again about it being an experience of the heart, but he says very clearly that doesn't come to us by moving from where we are to any other place. It's not a relocation. It's standing right where we are and learning to love by going within. He says redemption means escape from the walls of egotism, all of that which keeps us ignorant. And then he says there's two ways to come to this. One is by deeper meditation, where God can just be revealed. But the other way to come to this, and remember, we're talking again about opening the heart and finding the love of God there. It's what all of these lessons are. He says, is by serving others with that love, by seeing God in them. One of the other questions that was asked the other night was by a teacher about a student who was very self-demeaning and critical. And the question was, how can we help this young student who's constantly demeaning themselves? We've tried so many different things. How could we help them? And I thought about it for a minute, and I thought, there is really only one way to help anybody through that, and that is to love them with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, to see God in them and to love them. And of course, as we do that, we are living in the presence of God. We have to be if we're looking to see the perfection in them. But as we speak, not with words, but with our heart's love to their own perfection, then soon, even though they may be kicking and screaming the whole way, they will open to that love. It will affect them. It will empower them. If we try and use words which come from the rational mind. You know, our master's saying you can never solve a problem on the level that it was created. That's not a rational thing, to be so self-demeaning, self-critical. It's rational, it's from the mind, it's from the ego. You can't approach it with a rational argument, quite frankly. If you try to, the person just thinks you're crazy and they write you off right away. I know I'm not smart. I know I'm not pretty. If you're telling me that, how can I ever believe you? But when we love people with the love of God, when we let that love pour through us, when we're willing to live in that presence and love in that way, then people are changed. People are affected, and Swamiji says the way to our own redemption is by serving others, by constantly seeing God in them, by serving, knowing in each moment that you are serving God. And through that, of course, we're doing that to both practice the presence, but this talk is not entitled Practicing the Presence. It's called Living in the Presence of God. And when we do that, it becomes so magnetic that others around us, whenever we're able to do that, they feel loved. The words don't matter. They feel God's love. It's not a human love. That's not what we're aiming for. But I heard a wonderful story. I think this is a true story, and I can't tell you where I heard it, but I did, about two babies that were both born premature, very premature, and they were in incubators. And one of them was thriving, and everybody in the preemie nursery knew that they would live. But the other one was going to die. It was very clear. And there was a nurse there who, against all hospital rules, took both babies and put them in the same incubator. And whoever was telling this story said that the baby that was going to live took his arm and put it over the other baby. They were in an incubator, if you've ever seen them. That's pretty close. And they said within hours that people in the nursery could see that the baby that was absolutely meant to die was going to live. And they did both live. Now that is a miracle of love. It's just people could see it, that in their closeness to God, we could say, certainly not rational. These are two premature infants. But somehow that love of God coming through that one child, literally that warmth, that closeness, that Gita saying, you will never lose sight of me, and I will never lose sight of you. And that baby thrived. And I would say in many ways in our own lives, we keep ourselves in a state of near death. We actually do. We close ourselves off from light. We close ourselves off from love. We close ourselves down to the experience of joy. But whatever we can do, and we're given so many opportunities, so many in everything around us, but mostly in satsang, mostly in being together, certainly again in deep meditation, to the best that any of us can do that, but so many other ways to experience the love of God flowing through each of us, to each other, from each other, opening our heart, really with each other, what we say in our purification ceremony. Open your heart to me, and I will enter. Well, we can all do that for each other. We can all do that for each other. You know, these great saints come, and they are perfect in realizing the truth about God. But the other truth is that through his infinite wisdom and infinite energy and manifestation, God is alive and well in every one of us and in every living thing. And when we know that, we can seek that love in each other. We can seek that love in each other, and we can share it with each other. And the knowing of that, again, just the saying of that, the knowing of that, the practice of that keeps us living in the presence of God. Swamiji says, in whatever way we expand our self-identity, the way of redemption lies in the expansion itself. Those are such meaningful words. Every effort we make brings us closer again to what is being called redemption here, which just means lifting ourselves up away from ego-centered, ignorant living, self-identified, and up into the consciousness of the divine, up into living in the presence of God.
A poor little girl walking in the cold, her clothing all tattered and thin, spied a rich man standing outside a church, outside a church, oh, outside a church. Spied a rich man standing outside a church, the service about to begin. Please, sir, she said, hear an orphan child. The cold winds of winter have come. I've no place to live, not in all the world. Oh, help me find work in some home. The rich man frowned. Don't you hear that hymn? Good people have gathered in prayer. It's a day for worship, impious girl, impious girl, oh, impious girl. It's a day for worship, impious girl. Don't speak here of earthly affairs. He turned then and entered the holy church. The girl wandered down the cold street, and there all at once she beheld a small boy. No jacket, no shoes for his feet. His clothing was shabby, as worn as her own. He shivered against a closed door. Ah, alas, he cried, none will take me in, take me in, none will take me in. Alas, he cried, none will take me in. Though I'm starving and cold, for I'm poor, Seeing him, she cried, "How I feel for you. It's bitter with no friends to live. Here, please take my shawl. It's all I can spare. Though it's shameful, so little to give." She wrapped him all up in the flimsy cloth and kissed his cold forehead and smiled. Suddenly, a warmth like a summer breeze, like a summer breeze. Suddenly, a warmth like a summer breeze encircled this poor girl and child, and a tender voice said, "My daughter, I'm here. No more shall you weep without friends, for in yonder church there's no love like yours. Those with pure hearts, their needs I attend." My child, home and sorrows would turn to joy if they knew that to share was no loss. For its kindness broadens the human heart, the human heart. For its kindness broadens the human heart. I know I who died on the cross. Worship means but love, and my love you found by your gift to me here in the cold. And she found their clothes were now woolen and warm, and the shawl was now spun of fine